They said humans fear battle. Then humanity struck with unmatched fury. Part 5. The Galaxy Remembers. 3 weeks after the battle, the Great Hall of the Galactic Council was full again. But this time, nobody was laughing. Ambassador Oren of the Pelori Collective stood at the center of the chamber floor. Above him, hundreds of alien delegations sat in their curved rows, and every eye, every lens, every sensor, every organ of sight in that enormous room was fixed on him. The glass ceiling showed the stars, as it always did, but today those stars felt different. Today, they felt like they were watching too. Oren was not a warrior. He was not a politician. He was a recorder. His species observed and documented, and in 200 years of galactic history, no Pelori had ever asked to address the full council. Until now. 3 weeks ago, Oren began. The Tessari Dominion invaded the human colony of New Incheon, with a fleet of 4,000 warships and a ground force of 600,000 soldiers. They expected surrender within hours. What they received instead was a lesson that I believe this council, and every species in this galaxy, needs to hear. The chamber was so silent that Oren could hear the hum of the atmospheric filters. The Tessari lost 2,800 warships. They lost 40% of their ground forces. They retreated in full, their flagship crippled, their grand arbiter disgraced. The humans lost 1,600 vessels and suffered severe damage to the colony. But New Incheon held. He let the numbers settle. Then he said something that would be quoted for centuries. Every species in this room looked at humanity and saw weakness. You saw people who built hospitals instead of battleships. Who sent food instead of soldiers. Who answered laughter with silence and cruelty with kindness. And you decided that they were soft. You were wrong. You were not looking at weakness. You were looking at a choice. And there is nothing in this galaxy more dangerous than a kind species that has been forced to stop being kind. The chamber erupted. Some species shouted in agreement, others argued. The Tessari delegation sat in absolute silence, their seats half empty. On Tessari Prime, the aftermath was brutal. Grand Arbiter Valen was stripped of his rank and his command. The Tessari Governing Council, humiliated by the defeat, blamed him publicly. He accepted the blame without protest. There was nothing left in him to protest with. He was last seen in a small room in the military quarter, sitting by a window that looked out at the stars. An aide brought him food. He did not eat it. He just sat there, staring at the darkness. And those who saw him said his golden eyes looked like they had gone dim, like a fire that had burned down to ash and would not light again. Sub-Commander Ithel was promoted to the rank of Fleet Commander, the youngest in Tessari history. Her first act was to open a diplomatic channel to Earth. She did not send a speech. She did not send terms or conditions. She sent a single message, 4 words long. We hear you now. The response from Earth came within the hour. It was equally simple. Then, let us talk. On New Incheon, the colony was broken but breathing. Cho Tae-sung walked through the streets of Haenam on a gray morning, 3 weeks after the last Tessari soldier had been evacuated from the surface. The city looked like a mouthful of broken teeth. Buildings were split open, their insides exposed to the sky. The park where children used to play was a field of churned earth and shattered trees. But people were already working. He saw a crew of engineers welding steel beams on what had been a school. He saw farmers in the fields outside the city, clearing debris and turning soil that was still gray with ash. He saw a group of teenagers painting a mural on the side of a damaged building. A picture of the planet seen from space, green and blue and whole. They painted it the way it had been before the invasion, the way it would be again. He found Park Unji in the Central District, running a makeshift kitchen out of a shipping container. She was serving rice porridge to a line of people that stretched around the block. Soldiers, civilians, children, all mixed together. The porridge was simple: rice, water, salt, and a few vegetables that had survived the bombings. But people held their bowls with both hands and ate slowly, and some of them cried, because it tasted like something they thought they had lost. "Ensign," Unji said when she saw him. She smiled. "Eat." Taesung took a bowl. He sat on an overturned crate and watched the line of people. A little girl was holding her mother's hand. A soldier with a bandaged head was laughing at something his friend said. Two old men were arguing about the best way to fix a broken water pipe. "How do you do this?" Taesung asked. "How do you just start again?" Unji wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him. "What else would we do? This is what we do. We always rebuild. After every storm, after every fire, after every war. We bury our dead, we cry, and then we pick up our tools and we build again. That is what it means to be human." Taesung thought about those words for a long time. On Earth, Admiral Kang Do-hyun held a press conference. It was broadcast across the Galactic Network, and for the first time in human history, the galaxy actually listened. Do-hyun stood at a simple podium. No flags behind him, no military display, just a man in a uniform, speaking clearly. 80 years ago, he said, when humanity first entered the galactic community, we saw what the galaxy was. We saw species that measured worth in firepower. We saw empires built on conquest. We saw that the strong devoured the weak, and that kindness was treated as an invitation to attack. He paused. We made a decision. We would not become what we saw. We would not build our civilization on fear. But we are not fools. We knew that one day someone would come for us. So we prepared. We hid our strength inside our kindness. We built warships inside cargo ships. We trained soldiers who looked like doctors. We created a military doctrine so secret that not a single alien intelligence agency detected it in 80 years. He looked directly into the camera. We did not want this war. We have never wanted any war. But we will not apologize for defending our people. And we want the galaxy to understand something very clearly. We chose peace. We did not choose it because we were weak. We chose it because we knew, better than anyone, what war costs. We knew because we almost destroyed ourselves with it, long before we ever reached the stars. The conference ended. The galaxy was quiet. In a hospital on New Incheon, Commander Baek Ji-hwan lay in a bed with bandages around his torso. His wound had finally been treated, 2 weeks late, because he had kept refusing until there was no one else left in line. Captain Yoon Nari came to visit him. Her arm was in a sling, and she had a new scar on her collarbone, and she walked into his room like she owned the building. "You look terrible," she said. "You look worse," he replied. She sat in the chair beside his bed. They were quiet for a moment. Then Ji-won reached under his pillow and pulled out his poetry book. It was battered and stained, blood, dirt, rain, smoke, but it was intact. He held it out to her. "I do not need this anymore," he said. Nari frowned. "You love this book." "I do, but I always carried it because I could not find the right words myself. I read other people's words because mine were not enough." He paused. "I wrote something, last night, my own." He turned to the last page. There was a short poem written in shaky handwriting. He tore the page out carefully and gave it to her. Nari read it. Then she folded the paper very carefully and put it in her pocket, and she did not say anything for a while, because she was trying very hard not to cry. She did cry, eventually, just a little. She would have denied it if anyone asked. She never told anyone what the poem said. It was hers now. 1 week later, the UEDC assigned Captain Yunari to lead a new task force. Its mission was not war, it was protection. Human ships would now patrol the neutral shipping lanes that smaller, weaker species depended on. They would defend worlds that had no fleets of their own. They would be a shield for those who could not shield themselves. Nari accepted the assignment, but before she left Earth, she went to Admiral Do-hyun's office. "I will protect them," she said. "Every species, every world. I will be what we said we were." Do-hyun nodded. "But make sure the galaxy knows something," she added. Her eyes were hard and bright. "If anyone comes for our people again, for any of the people under our protection, there will not be a second warning." Do-hyun looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a small, tired, proud smile, and said, "I will make sure they know, Captain." Ambassador Oren finished his report on the day the first Tasari diplomatic ship arrived at New Incheon for the peace summit. He had been writing for weeks, and the final document was the longest the Pelori Collective had ever produced on a single species. The final paragraph took him the longest to write. He rewrote it 11 times before he was satisfied. It read, "Do not mistake human kindness for human weakness. They chose peace, not because they could not fight, but because they knew, better than anyone, what fighting costs. They walked among us as healers and builders and merchants, and we laughed at them. We called them soft. We called them afraid. And when they were forced to fight, the galaxy learned why they had chosen peace. Let this record stand as a warning and a hope. A warning, because humanity has shown what it can do. And a hope, because even after everything that was done to them, they chose to protect rather than to conquer. The galaxy does not deserve their kindness, but it needs it." On the rebuilt orbital station above New Incheon, Lieutenant Cho Tae-sung, newly promoted, stood at the observation window and watched the Tasari diplomatic vessel dock. It was a small ship, painted white, with no weapons. It carried Ambassador Ethel and a delegation of 12. The fields below were green again, not fully recovered. That would take years, but green, alive, growing. Tae-sung watched the Tasari ship lock into the docking bay, and he thought about the first time he had seen Tasari ships. The blinding flashes, the shaking station, the fear that had tasted like metal in his mouth. He thought about Park Eun-ji's rice porridge. He thought about Commander Ji-won reading poetry on a burning rooftop. He thought about Captain Nari flying into the heart of a fleet with a smile that could cut steel. He thought about all of it, and he said to himself, quietly, so that only the stars could hear, "We were never afraid. We just hoped we would never have to prove it." Below him, on the scarred and healing world of New Incheon, a farmer planted a seed in dark soil. The wind carried the smell of rain, and somewhere, far across the galaxy, a species that had once laughed at humanity read Oren's report and did not laugh. They did not laugh ever again. They said, "Humans fear battle." Then humanity struck with unmatched fury. Part 2. New Incheon Falls, almost. Ensign Cho Tae-sung was 22 years old and had never seen a warship that was not human. He stood at the observation window of Orbital Station Hala, high above the green and blue world of New Incheon, and he watched the stars. His shift was almost over. He was thinking about the letter he wanted to write to his mother, who lived on the colony's southern continent, in a town surrounded by rice fields. Then the alarms began. The first thing Tae-sung noticed was the light, a flash far out in the darkness, like a match being struck. Then another, then 100 more, then 1,000. The flashes grew into shapes, long, sharp, dark shapes that poured out of faster-than-light travel, like water from a broken dam. Tasari warships. He had seen pictures of them in the academy. They looked like blades made of black stone, covered in ridges and weapon ports. He counted. He stopped counting at 300 because his hands were shaking too badly. The station commander, a woman named Lieutenant Go Mireille, appeared beside him. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Battle stations," she said. "This is not a drill." Taesung ran to his post. His job was communications. He sat at his console, and his fingers trembled over the keys. He was afraid. He was so afraid that he could taste metal in his mouth. He thought about his mother in the rice fields. He thought about the 11 million people on the surface below. Then he pressed his hands flat on the console, took a breath, and began working. The Tassari broadcast came 20 minutes later. Grand Arbiter Volan's face filled every screen on the station and every screen on the planet below. His golden eyes looked down at the camera like a predator studying something small and soft. "People of Earth," Volan said, "you have 6 hours. Surrender this world. Disarm your vessels. Kneel before the Tassari Dominion. If you do this, you will live. If you do not, you will burn. This is not a negotiation. This is a fact." The broadcast ended. The station went quiet. Taesung looked at Lieutenant Go. She looked back at him. Nobody spoke. From Earth, there was no reply. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The Tassari fleet held position, waiting. On the Galactic Network, other species watched the live feeds with a mix of pity and amusement. Ambassador Oren, aboard a neutral observation vessel, stared at his screens and felt something cold in his stomach. The humans were silent. Completely silent. No diplomats, no pleas, no surrender, just silence. "They are frozen with fear," said the Venari commentator on the public broadcast. As expected, Auron said nothing, but he noticed something that no one else seemed to notice. The human trade ships that were usually scattered across this sector, cargo haulers, medical transports, mining vessels, were gone. Every single one. As if they had all quietly moved somewhere else days ago. As if someone had told them to. Aboard the flagship Baekdu, which was still 16 hours away at maximum speed, Admiral Kang Do-hun stood at the center of his bridge. Around him, officers moved with calm urgency. There was no panic. There was no shouting. Every person on this ship had trained for this moment, even though they had hoped it would never come. "Doctrine Zero is fully active," reported Han Somi, the chief science officer. She was a thin woman with glasses and steady hands. She stood at a holographic display that showed the positions of every human vessel in 3 sectors. "All civilian ships have reached safe zones. Conversion protocols are running. We will have full military activation in 14 hours. Do-hyun nodded. "How many?" "When conversion is complete, we will have approximately 5,200 combat-capable vessels." An officer nearby let out a small breath. 5,000. The number hung in the air. Do-hyun had spent 30 years preparing for this. Doctrine Zero was humanity's deepest secret. When humans first entered the galaxy and saw how violent it was, how every species was armed, how wars were constant, how the strong ate the weak, they made a decision. They would not show their teeth. They would build their military in secret, hidden inside the bones of their civilian fleet. Every trade ship had reinforced hull plating beneath its cargo panels. Every hospital vessel carried concealed weapon bays. Every mining rig could be converted into a gunship in hours. The galaxy saw a species of doctors and merchants. Underneath, there was something else entirely. But the Baekdu was still too far away. New Incheon had to survive until they arrived. "Get me Captain Yoon Nari," Do-hyun said. The face that appeared on the screen was young, sharp, and angry. Nari was the captain of the destroyer Iron Lily, and she was already moving. Her rapid response squadron, 30 fast attack ships, was 4 hours from New Incheon. "Admiral," she said, "I see the fleet count. 4,000. Can you hold them?" "I can hurt them. Holding is your job." "Then hurt them, Captain. Buy us time." Nari smiled. It was not a kind smile. "With pleasure, sir." 4 hours later, the Tessari began their bombardment. Orbital Station Hala shook like a toy in a giant's hand. Explosions tore through the outer ring. Taesung was thrown from his chair. He hit the wall and felt something crack in his left arm. Pain flooded through him, sharp and hot. Smoke filled the corridor. People were screaming. Through the cracked observation window, he could see the surface of New Incheon below, and he could see the bright flashes of Tessari weapons striking the ground. They were bombing the farms, the towns, the schools. Taesung pulled himself up with his good arm. Blood ran down his face from a cut above his eye. He limped back to his console. It was still working. He opened a channel and began broadcasting evacuation orders to the surface. His voice shook, but the words were clear. Then something impossible happened. 30 human ships appeared inside the Tessari formation. Not at the edge, not approaching from a distance. Inside. They had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at a distance so close that any navigation computer would have refused the calculation. It was a maneuver that should have torn the ships apart. No species in the galaxy would attempt it. The margin of error was 0. Captain Yunari did not care about margins of error. The Iron Lily and her squadron opened fire at point-blank range. At that distance, even the lightest human weapons could punch through Tessari armor. The effect was devastating. Tessari ships exploded in chains. Debris fields bloomed like flowers made of fire and metal. In the first 90 seconds, Nari's 30 ships destroyed or crippled 41 Tessari warships. Nari opened a broadcast on all frequencies. Every ship in the system heard it. Every alien watching the galactic feed heard it. Ambassador Auron heard it aboard his observation vessel, and his hands went still. "You wanted our answer," Nari said. Her voice was calm and cold and clear. "Here it is." The Tessari regrouped fast. They were experienced warriors, and 4,000 ships could absorb losses. They turned their guns on Nari's squadron and fired with everything they had. The Iron Lily took a direct hit to her port side. 2 of Nari's ships were destroyed. She pulled back, weaving through debris, firing as she went. It was not a victory. It was a message. On the surface of New Incheon, Commander Bak Ji-hwan stood in the basement of a school that had been converted into a command post. He was a big man with a scar that ran from his forehead to his jaw, and he carried a small book of poetry in his chest pocket. Above him, the sky was full of fire. Tessari drop pods were falling like burning rain. The ground invasion had begun. Ji-hwan looked at the soldiers around him. They were young. Many of them were shaking. He opened his poetry book and read aloud a single verse about the sea, about how it looks peaceful on the surface, but holds a power beneath that can break mountains. Then he closed the book, put it back in his pocket, and said, "They think we are the surface. Let us show them the deep." The soldiers picked up their weapons and moved into the burning streets. They said humans fear battle. Then humanity struck with unmatched fury. Part 1. The Galaxy's Gentle Species. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was built inside an asteroid the size of a small moon. Its ceiling was made of glass, and through it 1,000 stars burned without blinking. Hundreds of alien species sat in curved rows that rose like a stadium, each delegation behind their own banner. The air smelled of a dozen different atmospheres, filtered and blended so that everyone could breathe. Ambassador Auron of the Pelori Collective sat in the observation tier, high above the main floor. His species did not vote. They did not fight. They watched and they recorded. That was their purpose. Auron had watched 600 council sessions over his long career, and he had learned one truth above all others. The galaxy respected only one thing: the ability to destroy. Today the council was arguing about a border dispute between two mid-level empires. The debate had gone on for hours, and tempers were rising. Then the human delegation stood up. The human ambassador was a small woman with dark hair and a calm voice. She proposed a shared resource agreement. She suggested that both sides pull back their fleets and allow neutral trade to flow through the disputed zone. She spoke clearly and without anger. The chamber went quiet for a moment. Then the laughter began. It started with the Tasari delegation. Their representative, a tall reptilian creature with scales the color of dried blood, let out a barking laugh that echoed off the glass ceiling. Others joined in. The Venari clicked their mandibles in amusement. The Drawfax stomped their heavy feet. Even species that usually stayed silent were shaking their heads. The human ambassador stood still through all of it. She did not flinch. She waited until the laughter died, and then she said, "The offer stands," and returned to her seat. Aaron watched her carefully. He had seen humans do this many times. They proposed peace, they were laughed at, they sat down, and then they went back to building hospitals on broken worlds and sending food to species that hated them. The galaxy had decided long ago what humans were. They were soft, they were kind, they were afraid. Aaron was not so sure. He had read the biology reports. Humans were pursuit predators. Their ancestors had chased animals across open plains for hours until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They had bones that healed stronger after breaking. Their bodies could flood with a chemical called adrenaline that made them faster, stronger, and almost immune to pain for short bursts. They bonded with anything, other humans, animals, even machines, and they would die to protect what they bonded with. But none of that mattered to the galaxy, because humans had never fought a war in space. Not once in 120 years. When pirates raided their cargo ships, they negotiated. When a species called the Brith burned one of their small outposts, humans rebuilt it and sent medical aid to the Brith homeworld, which was suffering from a plague. The galaxy saw this and called it weakness. Far from the council hall, in a war room carved into the belly of a mountain on a world called Tessari Prime, Grand Arbiter Valen stood before a wall of light. The wall showed a map of human territory, 18 colony worlds, dozens of space stations, and trade routes that stretched across 2 galactic arms. All of it undefended. All of it rich. Valen was the supreme military commander of the Tessari Dominion, an empire that controlled 600 star systems. He had conquered 11 species in his career. He had never lost a campaign. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scales thick and scarred from old battles, his eyes like 2 drops of molten gold. "The humans," he said to his war council, "are the softest fruit on the lowest branch. Their worlds are wealthy, their technology is advanced, and their military is a joke." The officers around the table growled in agreement. Valen touched the map, and a single world glowed blue. New Incheon, a farming colony, population 11 million. It sat at the edge of human space, far from Earth, with only a small orbital station for defense. "We begin here," Valen said. 4,000 warships. We arrive, we demand surrender, and when they kneel, because they will kneel, we take everything, their crops, their technology, their shipyards. The rest of their colonies will see what happened, and they will surrender too. We will own human space within a single season. The council roared their approval. All except one. Sub-Commander Ithel sat at the far end of the table. She was younger than the others, her scales a lighter shade of gray, her eyes sharp and careful. She had spent 3 years studying human behavior as part of the Dominion's intelligence division. She had read things that troubled her. "Grand Arbiter," she said, and the room went quiet. I would like to note something in the human biology files. Valen looked at her with mild irritation. Speak. Humans have the highest endurance rating of any known bipedal species. Their pain tolerance is among the top 5% of all cataloged organisms. They form social bonds so strong that they will charge into certain death to save a single companion. And they have a documented history, on their homeworld, of fighting wars that lasted decades. Wars where they lost millions of their own kind, and still refused to stop. She paused. The room was silent. They did not stop fighting each other until they nearly destroyed their own planet. And then they looked up at the stars and chose a different path. I believe we should consider the possibility that humans are not weak. I believe they are something much more dangerous. They are a species that chose to stop. Valen stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Resilience means nothing without the will to fight, he said, and humans have no will. They have proven it 100 times. They run, they talk, they heal, they do not fight. Prepare the fleet. Ithel said nothing more. She lowered her head and made a note in her personal file. It read, I hope I am wrong. 3 weeks later, 4,000 Tesserae warships entered faster than light travel. Their destination was New Incheon. The galaxy did not notice. No one sent a warning. But someone already knew. On Earth, in a room that officially did not exist, Fleet Admiral Kang Do-hyun sat alone at a wide desk made of dark wood. He was a man in his mid-50s, with gray at his temples and hands that never trembled. In front of him was a single screen showing the Tesserae fleet's trajectory. He had been watching it for 6 days. Do-hyun closed the file. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city of Busan glittered under a night sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, beyond those stars, 4,000 warships were coming to take what his people had built. He took a slow breath. So, he said quietly to the empty room, they finally came. He pressed a button on his desk. A single word appeared on every classified military screen across 18 human worlds. Doctrine 0, active. And across the silence of space, humanity began to wake. They said humans fear battle. Then humanity struck with unmatched fury. Part 3. The ground remembers. The Tesserae soldiers landed expecting silence. They expected empty streets and white flags and a species on its knees. What they found was darkness. Commander Baek Ji-hwan had ordered every light in the city of Haenam turned off. Every street lamp, every building, every sign. The power grid was shut down in a controlled sequence, sector by sector, until the entire city was black. The only light came from the burning sky above, where Tesserae drop pods still fell in long red streaks. The Tesserae had excellent armor. They had plasma rifles that could melt through concrete. They were taller and stronger than humans, with thick scales that could stop a blade. Their officers had told them this mission would be easy. Walk in, crush resistance, secure the colony, go home as heroes. The first Tesserae squad entered the city through the Eastern Boulevard. It was a wide street, lined with shops and apartment buildings. The squad moved in standard formation, 2 columns, weapons up, scanning for targets. Their helmet sensors showed no movement, no heat signatures. The city appeared empty. Then the street exploded beneath them. Jihan's engineers had buried charges under every major road in the city during the 6 hours of Valen's ultimatum. While the galaxy thought humanity was frozen with fear, Jihan's soldiers had been digging. The blast tore through the Tesserae column and sent bodies flying. Before the survivors could regroup, gunfire erupted from the windows above. Short, precise bursts from positions that had been prepared hours ago. The Tesserae fired back, but there was nothing to hit. The humans fired and moved, never staying in one place longer than 10 seconds. By the time Tasari plasma bolts struck the windows, the shooters were already 3 rooms away, running through holes cut in the walls between apartments. Aboard the Tasari command ship in orbit, Sub-Commander Eiffel watched the ground feeds and felt her blood go cold. She had studied human military history. She knew what she was seeing. The humans were not fighting a battle. They were fighting a war of attrition, bleeding the Tasari one cut at a time, using the city itself as a weapon. She opened a channel to Valen. Grand Arbiter, the ground forces are meeting significant resistance. The humans are using asymmetric tactics. Our casualties in the first hour are already irrelevant, Valen said. Send more troops. Flatten the buildings if you must. Eiffel closed the channel. She looked at the ground feeds again. In one video, a Tasari soldier was firing into a dark building. A human appeared behind him, a small figure, fast and low, and placed an explosive charge on the back of his armor, before disappearing into a doorway. The charge detonated 3 seconds later. The Tasari were bigger. They were stronger. They had better weapons, but they had been trained for a different kind of war. Open fields, clear lines, overwhelming force. They did not know how to fight an enemy that lived in the walls, an enemy that turned every doorway into a trap and every rooftop into a firing position, an enemy that refused, absolutely refused, to stand still and die properly. On the ground, Ensign Cho Taesong was lost. The orbital station had been partially evacuated after the bombardment, and Taesong had been put on a shuttle to the surface. The shuttle had been hit during landing. He woke up in a field outside the city with a broken arm and a ringing in his ears. His uniform was torn. He was alone. He walked toward the city because he did not know what else to do. The sound of explosions grew louder with every step. The sky was orange and gray. He passed a burned farmhouse and a field of rice that had been turned to ash. Something inside him, something deeper than training, deeper than duty, began to harden. He found them in the basement of a community center on the edge of the city. There were about 40 of them. Civilians, farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, a retired engineer, 2 teenagers who could not have been older than 17. They had weapons, some military rifles taken from a damaged supply depot, some hunting tools, some things that had been made from farming equipment. They were organized. They had barricades at every entrance. They had a watch rotation, and they were led by an old woman named Park Eun-ji. Eun-ji was 63 years old. She had been a school principal before the invasion. She was short and thin, and her hair was white, and she looked at Taesong with eyes that were completely unafraid. "You are military?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Ensign Cho Taesong." "Good. You can help with the south barricade. We are expecting another patrol in 2 hours." Taesong stared at her. "Ma'am, you are civilians. You should be in the underground shelters." Eun-ji looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "We built this world with our hands. We planted every field. We raised every building. We named every river and every hill. This is not just a colony, Ensign. This is our home, and we will not give it away." Taesong wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that untrained civilians had no place in a war zone, but he looked around the room and saw their faces, tired, dirty, scared, and absolutely determined, and he understood something. These people were not playing at being soldiers. They were defending their home in the only way they knew how, with their hands, with their hearts, with whatever they could find. He went to the south barricade. Over the next 2 days, the Tasari ground campaign turned into a nightmare, not just in Haenim, but across the entire colony. In the northern forests, human rangers used the dense vegetation to ambush Tasari convoys. In the coastal cities, fishing boats carried soldiers behind enemy lines at night. In the farming regions, the irrigation tunnels, built to carry water to the rice fields, became a network of underground passages that humans used to appear and disappear like ghosts. The Tasari soldiers began to break. They were not cowards. They were warriors from a proud military tradition, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this. They would clear a building and take fire from the building behind them. They would set up a camp and find it sabotaged by morning. They would chase a retreating squad into an alley and find the alley rigged with explosives. And the worst part, the thing that truly shook them, was that the humans would not stop. Ithel read the reports with growing horror. Tasari soldiers were filing accounts of humans fighting with broken bones, of humans carrying wounded friends on their backs and then returning to the fight, of a human who was shot through the leg, crawled to a wall, propped herself up, and kept firing until her weapon was empty. Of groups of humans singing, actually singing, in the middle of a firefight, as if the music was holding them together. One Tasari officer wrote in his report, "They do not fight like soldiers. They fight like something that has decided it will not die. I have never seen anything like it. I do not want to see it again." Eiffel went to Valon one more time. "Grand Arbiter," she said, "the humans are not behaving like a species that fears war. They are behaving like a species that chose not to wage it. That is a very different thing. A coward runs because he cannot face pain. These humans face pain and keep moving. We are not fighting cowards. We are fighting something that was already forged in fire long before we arrived." Valon stared at her. For the first time, he did not have an immediate answer. Then he set his jaw and said, "Call for reinforcements. Double the ground forces. And if that is not enough, it will be enough." Ithel left the room. She did not believe him. On the surface of New Incheon, night fell over the ruined city of Hanem. The fires had burned down to embers. Commander Baek Ji-won stood on the roof of a half-destroyed apartment building and looked out over the streets below. The Tessari had pulled back from this district. For the first time in Tessari military history, a ground force had retreated from a species they called lesser. Jitwon was bleeding from a wound in his side. He had refused treatment. There were others who needed it more. He took the poetry book from his pocket. It was stained with dust and blood. He opened it to a random page and read aloud to the empty sky. The words were about a mountain that stands in a storm, not because it cannot feel the wind, but because it has roots that go deeper than the storm can reach. Below him, in the streets, his soldiers were already rebuilding the barricades. Somewhere in the distance, Taesung was helping Park Eun-ji carry water to the wounded. The ground remembered, and the ground held. They said humans fear battle. Then humanity struck with unmatched fury. Part 4. The Fury Arrives. The galaxy was watching. Every species with access to the Galactic Communication Network had tuned in to the New Incheon conflict. It was the most watched event in living memory. On 100 different worlds, aliens gathered around screens in homes, government buildings, and public squares. The commentators called it the fall of New Incheon. They spoke about it as if it were already over, as if humanity had already lost and was simply too stubborn to accept it. Ambassador Oren sat in the observation deck of his neutral vessel, parked at a safe distance from the battle zone. His screens showed the Tessari fleet still in full control of orbit. His other screens showed the ground feeds, smoke, fire, and the small stubborn shapes of humans still fighting in the ruins. He had been watching for 3 days without sleep. He had refused. "Something is coming," Oren said quietly. He could not explain why he felt this. It was not logic. It was something in the way the humans moved. Not like a defeated species running out of time, but like a species that was waiting for something. Then the long-range sensors screamed. It started as a flicker at the edge of the system, a gravitational disturbance, then another, then dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The sensor readouts went wild, scrolling numbers so fast that the Tasari tactical officers could not keep up. Something was coming out of faster-than-light travel, something enormous. The first ships appeared like stars being born, bright flashes of light that cooled into solid shapes. 800 warships in perfect formation, arranged in a pattern that looked like a spearhead aimed at the heart of the Tasari fleet. These were the ships of the United Earth Defense Corps, real warships. Purpose-built destroyers, cruisers, and carriers, painted in dark gray with the blue circle of Earth on their hulls. But they were not alone. Behind the warships came the others, thousands of them, cargo haulers with their trade markings still visible, but their hulls had changed. Panels had slid open to reveal weapon batteries that had been hidden for decades. Hospital ships with red crosses on their sides, now bristling with missile launchers that folded out like the petals of iron flowers. Mining rigs, their drilling arms replaced with plasma cannons. Research vessels, their sensor arrays converted into electronic warfare suites. They came, and they came, and they kept coming, until the sensor count passed 5,000 and was still climbing. Doctrine Zero. 80 years of secret preparation, unfolding in a single moment. The Tasari fleet went silent. Not a single communication was sent for 47 seconds. Eiffel would later describe that silence as the loudest sound she had ever heard. Grand Arbiter Valen stood on the bridge of his command ship and stared at the tactical display. His golden eyes did not blink. 4,000 Tasari warships against more than 5,000 human vessels. The numbers alone were not what shocked him. It was the fact that the humans had hidden this. For 80 years, they had smiled and traded and built hospitals and let the galaxy laugh at them. And behind that smile, they had been building this. "That is not possible," Valen said. His voice was flat. "It is happening, Grand Arbiter," Eiffel said from her station. Her voice was very quiet. Then the human broadcast began. Admiral Kang Do-hyun's face appeared on every screen in the system. He was standing on the bridge of the Baekdu, his hands clasped behind his back, his uniform clean and pressed. He looked like a man who had slept well and eaten breakfast and was now ready to do a job he had been preparing for his entire life. His face showed no anger. His voice showed no rage. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has passed anger, when he has reached the cold, still place on the other side. "This message is for Grand Arbiter Valen of the Tasari Dominion," Do-hyun said, "and for every species listening across the galactic network." He paused. The galaxy held its breath. "You struck our home. You burned our fields. You killed our children. You came to our door and demanded that we kneel. We heard you. We gave you our silence, and now we are here." Another pause. "We do not forgive." The broadcast ended, and then the human fleet began to move. Han Somi activated Project Hwarang from her station aboard the Baekdu. It was the other half of Doctrine Zero, a networked tactical system that linked every human ship through a shared combat intelligence. It was not a single AI. It was a web. Every ship's sensors fed into the web. Every ship's weapons were coordinated through it. The fleet did not move as 5,000 individual ships. It moved as one organism, one mind, one will. The Tasari saw the human fleet shift formation, and they did not understand what they were seeing. Tasari naval doctrine was built on strength, heavy formations, massive broadsides, overwhelming firepower concentrated on a single point. It was a hammer. It had worked for 1,000 years against 100 species. The human fleet was not a hammer. It was water. It flowed around the Tasari formations, finding gaps, exploiting weaknesses, striking from angles that should not have been possible. Small squadrons broke off and hit Tasari flanks, while the main body held their attention. Ships that appeared to be retreating suddenly reversed and fired into the backs of pursuing vessels. The entire human fleet breathed and shifted like a living thing, and the Tesari, who fought as individual captains, commanding individual ships, could not keep up. The battle became a slaughter. Tesari warships exploded in clusters. Their formations broke apart as captains panicked and tried to regroup. Volan screamed orders into the communication system, but his commands were outdated by the time they reached his ships. The humans had already moved, already adapted, already struck from a new direction. Captain Yun-Nari had been waiting for this. The Iron Lily had been repaired, barely. Half its weapon systems were still damaged. Its port side was held together with emergency welding. She had been given one mission by Admiral Do-hyun, and she intended to complete it. She led a strike force of 12 ships straight through the center of the battle, weaving through the debris fields of destroyed Tesari vessels, heading for one target, Volan's command ship. It was the largest vessel in the Tesari fleet, a massive dreadnought, bristling with weapons, surrounded by escort cruisers. Nari's squadron hit the escorts first. They came in fast and low, beneath the dreadnought's main firing arc, and tore into the escort ships with concentrated fire. 8 of Nari's 12 ships were hit. 3 were destroyed. She kept going. The Iron Lily reached the dreadnought's engine section and fired everything it had, every missile, every cannon, every weapon that still worked. The dreadnought's engines erupted in a chain of explosions that rippled across the ship's hull, like lightning across a dark sky. The massive vessel shuddered and began to drift, its propulsion dead, its power flickering. Nari's ship was in ruins. Half the bridge was exposed to space, sealed only by emergency force fields. She had a piece of metal in her shoulder that she had not noticed yet. But she was alive, and Volan's ship was crippled. On the bridge of the dying dreadnought, Volan stood in the smoke and the sparking wreckage, and watched his fleet being torn apart. The tactical display was a sea of red, destroyed ships, retreating ships, ships that had stopped responding entirely. He had lost over 2,000 vessels. The humans were still coming. The sub-commander stood at her station, blood on her face from a cut on her forehead, her expression completely calm. "What are they?" Volan whispered. Ithel looked at him with eyes that held no satisfaction, only sadness. "They are what happens when a kind species is given no choice." Volan lowered his head. For the first time in his long career, he gave an order he had never given before. "All ships, full retreat." The Tesari fleet turned and ran, but Admiral Do-hyun did not let them go quietly. Human ships pursued the retreating vessels, firing precise shots that crippled engines and disabled weapons, but did not destroy. The humans could have killed every retreating ship. They had the numbers, they had the position, they had the fury. But Do-hyun gave a specific order: disable, do not destroy. Let them limp home. Let them carry the memory of this day back to Tesari Prime. Let every Tesari soldier who survived tell the story of what happened when they came for humanity's home. He did not want to exterminate the Tesari. He wanted them to remember. As the last Tesari ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, the human fleet held position above New Incheon. The planet below was scarred and burning, but it was free. On the surface, Commander Baek Ji-won looked up at the sky and saw the flashes of the retreating enemy, and he sat down on the rubble and closed his eyes. Aboard her shattered ship, Captain Nari finally noticed the metal in her shoulder. She looked at it, looked at her first officer, and said, "Someone get me a medic and a drink." And in the observation deck of his neutral vessel, Ambassador Auron sat in silence for a very long time. Then he picked up his recording device and began to speak. "I have witnessed," he said slowly, "something that the galaxy will need a very long time to understand.